Hello and good morning, TOK class. What do you know? In today's lesson, we're going to look at identity before and after. The idea that certain mileposts in time mark a distinct border between a previous and a later identity. And we're specifically going to be looking today at collective identity, the identity of organizations, of groups, in this case, a small community in West Virginia and a city in southern Louisiana. So when we started our discussion of identity, we were concerned with items. We talked about the coffee cup in the philosophy video. We talked about the ship of Theseus. Now, the ship of Theseus is both an item and a collective. It's an item in that the ship is a distinct physical thing, but it's also composed of many parts. It includes a crew, which is composed of individuals. And as those parts wore out and were replaced, as those individuals left the crew and were replaced with new recruits, the concept of our identity changed when it concerned the ship of Theseus. We then moved on to the conception of personal identity and the impact of identifiers such as gender identity, religious identity, and how other types of conceptions of identity could impact the concept of the self. For today, we're going to zoom out. We're going to go to a much larger scale. We're going to start by looking at the city of New Orleans, a city which has an extremely long and celebrated history, rich with historical and cultural milestones, but which has, in the modern framework, a very clear before and after marking point. Now, I imagine that almost all of you, if not all of you, are too young to remember Katrina, but you may have dealt with its aftermaths in your community. I had just begun teaching, and I had been teaching for approximately a month when Katrina hit. And my school district was the site of relocation of many students who had been displaced from the flooding in New Orleans. A large number of those students never returned home. This is an American diaspora, a spreading of individuals away from their homeland into the larger world. For our video today, you're going to watch an assigned video from CBS News. I think it's from CBS Sunday Morning called, okay, I don't have the title here. But it's about New Orleans before and after Katrina. The link is in the email and the sources at the end of this video. And I want you to pay careful attention to the character of the people and of the city and see if you can mark differences in the before, during, and after phases of the discussion of New Orleans. All right. Having watched the Katrina video, I think you now have an idea of what I mean about demarcation points, a point you can mark as a dividing point, a point at which there's a clear before and after. In chemistry, we sometimes run the concept of phase changes, where a substance will reach a tipping point and then have a dramatic transformation in its physical properties. Individuals, communities, and even cities can experience the same thing. And there are those who argue that Katrina was a phase change moment for the city of New Orleans. In a similar way, a plane crash that happened way back in 1970, and this was before even I was teaching, marks a distinct transitional moment for a community in West Virginia. This event is the crash of Southern Airways Flight 932. This was a charter flight carrying the entire Marshall University football team home from an away game. They usually traveled by bus, but for various reasons, they were taking a charter flight. And minutes before reaching the runway, the plane crashed into the woods short of the airport. And this led to the death of all the passengers on board, including the entire university football team. This had a profound impact on the people of West Virginia. It is still memorialized today. Here you'll see a trailer for a dramatic reenactment produced by Warner Brothers called We Are Marshall.
Griffin, let's go!
I love you, Chris Griffin.
Hey, that was a big hit today. Fellas, I'm proud of you. We are Marshall! Almost home. A new day.
What's happened?
All 75 people are dead in the greatest disaster in college sports history.
This is our team.
I think you should have this back.
Chris gave it to you.
I promised the mothers that I'd look after their sons. There's not one of them left.
You might cancel the program. This ain't right. I'm sorry.
Jacqueline Gale called. Says he may be interested in the open coaching job.
Why do you want this job?
When I heard about what had happened, the only thing I could think about was how bad it would hurt if I was to lose before them. And I thought, hell, maybe I can help. This is my varsity team, huh? It's a new day, man.
We gotta get creative about who we're going after.
Ever played football before?
No, sir.
Rough it! You think you're the only one that's had it rough?
We're not honoring them, Jack. We're disgracing them.
This is not about a game. This is about what happened to this town.
There's something I think y'all need to hear.
This is our past. We cannot forget that. This is your opportunity to rise from these ashes. Funerals in today. One day, we're gonna be like every other team, where winning is everything, and nothing else matters. And when that day comes, that's when we'll honor them.
What day is it, son?
Game day.
What day?
Game day.
Time to play till the whistle blows.
Now, whether you're involved in sports or not, and I know that some of you are, some of you involved, I know, in team sports, but just as students growing up in Texas, I'm sure that many of you understand the identification of a community with its sports teams. High schools have their mascots, their traditions, their displayed banners. You can only imagine the hole left in a community, especially a small community, by a tragedy of this scale. After the Marshall disaster, well, what happened to the people? To help give you a sense of scale, the 75 killed included 37 team members, 8 of the coaching staff, 25 boosters. Those are alumni who contribute financially and otherwise to the team, and 5 members of the flight crew. The plane was completely destroyed and was without survivors. It's one of the worst disasters in the history of West Virginia. To put it in another context, it's estimated that 70 children lost one parent and 18 children lost both parents in this crash. This is a level of loss and devastation that thankfully we don't have anything in our direct community to compare to. Your personal family circumstances, of course, may well be different, but understand this was devastating. And unlike Katrina's impact on New Orleans, where there are some people who've maintained that it was a evolutionary but not revolutionary step, that it changed the city but it didn't change its heart. There's an understanding that this marks a clear dividing point in Marshall. And the dividing point isn't before and after the loss of the team. I've heard it expressed by people from the community around Marshall that the dividing point is before they realized the importance of their community and what it represented, and after the tragedy, the awareness of their community and what it represented. This is marked by a number of ceremonies that continue. There's a big impact on the community that lives to this day. In the case of Marshall, the answer to the question of could the program be rebuilt? Would it be a dishonor to go on as though nothing happened? Or would it be more appropriate to reconstitute the team, to attempt to rebuild the traditions, to start a new set of traditions and experiences that would reach back towards the past? And eventually the community and the program did recover. You can see in the graphic here the memorial fountain. Each year on the anniversary of the crash, the water of the memorial fountain is turned off, and it in a ceremony with a high degree of university and public attendance. And the water in the fountain remains off until the new season, when it is once again turned on. This represents a renewal of the community and an embrace of the disconnect that separates the present from the past. The idea that the present is related to but no longer directly connected to the past is an interesting solution to this idea of identity with discontinuity. So that brings us to our reflections. And again, there's not a written response. We're saving those up for our Thursday assignment and for our Saturday workshop. But I want you to think about, in the case of New Orleans, is New Orleans the same city now as it was before Hurricane Katrina? Would your answer change if you only knew it before? If you knew the old Katrina and then revisit it today, would the changes be so overwhelming as to disconnect your past identity of the city from its modern incarnation? What if you were a first-time visitor and you heard stories of the past, but you had only the experience of the city as it is? And finally, what if you had stayed all along? What if you had lived through the transitional period of flood, of recovery, of rebuilding, and now of growth? Does that change your perspective of the city and its identity? And when I say the city, I mean its traditions, its culture, its people, its history, the entire composite identity of the New Orleans metropolis. For the Marshall football program, the same questions. Is it the same program as it was before the accident? Is it a related but not connected program? And if you knew the program before 1970 and through the tragedy and rebuilding and today, if you only knew it today, or if you have only heard stories and have no real context, does this change the identity or your perception of the identity? And how does that impact the ways of knowing? Is it emotional connectivity? Is it language? Is it reason? Are you thinking your way through, feeling your way through, seeking inspiration, holding on to faith? All of these are valid paths to knowing. How is your experience of both New Orleans and Marshall impacted in terms of the ways of knowing. Keep those ideas and we'll talk about them soon. And this brings us to the end of Class 17. I've linked here to the resources that are used. I also want you to be thinking about concepts of identity from the last several lessons. We're going to try and bring all of this together on Saturday in a program we call Vitruvia, which looks at identity and the concept of ideals, of how an individual's identity relates to an ideal conception of that individual or of humanity. And we'll be looking at everything from Leonardo da Vinci to the identity of Batman. We're going to have a wide-ranging discussion with some practical application, and we're also going to get some information on your TOK oral presentations. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to all of you who can attend Saturday. I look forward to seeing you then.